Hi everyone, welcome to Study Buddy Homeschooling. In today's session, we'll be seeing the topic sexual reproduction in plants. So what is meant by sexual reproduction? In sexual reproduction, there is involvement of two parents, one male and one female, and there is fusion of male and female cells leading to formation of zygote. So when we talk about sexual reproduction in plants, flower is the reproductive part of the plant. This flower, it has four whorls. The outermost whorl is known as sepal. The sepal is also known as calyx. It is basically used for the protection of the bud. And inner to sepal, we have another layer which is known as petal. Petal is also known as corolla. It is very colorful and it is usually used for attracting the pollinators. So the sepal and petal put together are called the non-accessory parts of the flower because they don't directly help in reproduction. But inner to petal or corolla, there is a layer of stamens. Stamens are the male reproductive parts of the flower. So inner to stamen, you have the fourth layer which is known as the pistil, which is the female part of the flower. So there are four distinct whorls or layers in a flower. The outermost, which is sepal, also known as calyx. Inner to sepal you have petals, also known as corolla. And the third whorl, third inner whorl, is a stamens composed of the male cells of the flower, and the innermost whorl is a female part which is also known as pistil. So these flowers can be unisexual and bisexual. What do you mean by unisexual? So in some of the flowers, either there will be male parts or there will be female part. Either stamens will be present or only pistil will be present. Both will not be present. Such flowers are known as unisexual flowers. Example, papaya, watermelon, where you have separate male plants, you have separate female plants. And bisexual, when you talk about bisexual, example is this flower where both stamens and pistil are seen. Now let's look into the male reproductive part of the flower. The male part of the flower is composed of stamens. We discussed it's a third whorl in a flower, in a bisexual flower. These stamens collectively are called as androecium. These stamens, if you see, they are composed of what is known as filament. The thin tube-like part is known as filament and the top blob-like structure is known as anther. So the stamen is composed of filament and anther at the top. If you take a transverse section of the anther, you can see the picture here. This is an anther. A transverse section is taken and you find the image here. Inside the anther, there are lots of pollen grains. So these pollen grains are the actual male reproductive cells. So this anther contain number of male reproductive cells known as pollen grains. They contain the male cells. Female reproductive part of a flower. This female part looks more or less like a flower vase. The top curved part is known as stigma. It is quite sticky for the pollens to get stuck here. And from stigma, there is a tube like this. It is known as style. It is through which the pollen comes in. And the bottom rounded part is known as ovary. And inside the ovary is the actual female reproductive cell, which is the ovule. So what happens is, I told you the stigma, the top part is stigma, which is very sticky, and as soon as the pollen falls on it, it is very difficult for it to reach down till ovule, right? It is a small tiny cell. What happens is, as soon as it falls on the stigma, a tube-like structure develops from the pollen. This is known as pollen tube. So this pollen develops a tube-like structure known as pollen tube through which it is able to reach the ovule, and now there happens a fusion of the male germ cell from the pollen and it mixes with the female germ cell that is in the ovule, and they give rise to the formation of the zygote. most of the time what happens is this pollen, it could fall from the same flower. The pollen could be from the same flower. In such case, it is known as self-pollination. But if the pollen is going to be from a very different flower, either by wind or insects, it falls on this pistil. In such a case, it is known as cross-pollination. So the fusion of the male cell from the pollen and the female ovule cell leads to formation of zygote. This process is known as fertilization. The mixing of these two is known as fertilization. After fertilization, the first cell which is formed is known as zygote. And this zygote divides rapidly to form the embryo within the ovule. You have to remember that it's the ovary which becomes a fruit and the ovules inside become the seeds. So when you eat a fruit, the outer layer is a ovary and the seeds inside, what you see is it's made from ovules. You'll have to remember that ovary becomes a fruit and ovules become the seeds. And if you take any seed, there will be a embryonic part in the seed which is known as a cotyledon. This cotyledon acts as a food reserve. When you sow a seed, it has to grow, right? Where does it get the nutrients from? The growing plant, the radicle which grows into root and the plumule which goes into shoot takes the reserves from the cotyledon until it grows out and it attaches itself to the soil until it takes the nutrients from the soil. This cotyledon supplies the nutrients for the growing plant. Thanks for watching, and if you have any doubts, please leave your comments in the comment section and please do subscribe our channel. Thank you very much.